Thank you for that very warm and generous introduction. More than I deserve, but accepted in the spirit with which it was intended. My huge gratitude for this distinguished award and honorary fellowship. I feel humbled and overwhelmed to follow in the footsteps of so many illustrious past recipients. I would like to dedicate my acceptance of this award to the heroic LGBT campaigners of Sexual Minorities Uganda and allied Ugandan movements. They are spearheading the fight for LGBT rights in Uganda in a deeply repressive, intolerant society at great personal risk to their liberty and lives. Despite government, police, and religious persecution and the constant threat of vigilante and mob violence, they carry on the fight for LGBT freedom. I salute SMUG and allied LGBT groups and urge people to go to their website and make a donation to help them carry on their inspiring work against anti-LGBT hate. As the theme of my acceptance address, I ask you to join me in looking beyond the current state of national and international LGBT rights to what is likely to come to pass in the future. Specifically, I'd like to offer some ideas on the evolution of human sexuality, primarily, but not exclusively, as it pertains to LGBT people. While homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia have not disappeared, and while they remain particularly acute in many non-Western countries, here in the West, this prejudice is much less extreme and prevalent than it once was. Indeed, most Western nations are now beginning the transition to become post-homophobic societies. My big questions are as follows. What will happen if our societies evolve into a state of sexual enlightenment, where the differences of hetero and homo no longer matter? And how might this affect the future of same-sex desire and identity? We already know, thanks to a host of sex surveys, that even in narrow-minded, homophobic cultures, many people are born with a sexuality that is, to varying degrees, bisexual, capable of both homosexual and heterosexual attraction. Witness, for example, how same-sex relations often flourish among ostensibly straight people in single-sex institutions like schools, prisons, and the armed forces. Sociological sex research by Dr. Alfred Kinsey in the United States in the 1940s was the first major statistical evidence that gay and straight are not watertight, irreconcilable sexual orientations. He found that sexuality is, in fact, a continuum of desires and behaviors, ranging from exclusive heterosexuality to exclusive homosexuality. A substantial proportion of the population is bisexual, somewhere in between these two polarities. sharing an amalgam of same-sex and opposite-sex erotic and emotional feelings. These feelings may, of course, exist, but may not necessarily be consciously recognized or physically expressed. In Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, published in 1948, Kinsey recorded that 13% of the men he surveyed were either mostly or exclusively homosexual for at least 3 years between the ages of 16 and 55. Altogether, 37% of the men Kinsey questioned had experienced sex with other males to the point of orgasm. And half, yes, half, had experienced mental attraction or erotic arousal towards other men, sometimes transient and without being actioned. Bringing the situation up to date, the modern day trend is even clearer. A YouGov poll in the UK in August 2015 found that 49% of 18 to 24-year-olds said they were not 100% heterosexual, and 23% report having had a sexual experience with the person of the same sex. This isn't just a one-off, it appears to be part of a longer trend, with 27% of 25 to 39-year-olds also saying that they'd had a same-sex experience. It seems that bisexuality is the new normal. This trend is not unique to the UK. Similar findings have been documented by research in the United States and across Europe. So we're left with the conclusion that the possibility that individuals could share a capacity for both hetero and homo feelings is an idea supported long ago, including by anthropologists Colin Ford and Frank Beach. In Patterns of Sexual Behavior, published in 1965, they noted that certain forms of homosexuality were considered normal and acceptable in 49, that's 2/3, of 76 tribal societies they surveyed from the 1920s to the 1950s, or that were surveyed by others in that period. In addition, some of these societies, all men switched between opposite sex and same-sex relations with apparent ease during different phases of their lives. This led Ford and Beach to deduce that homosexuality is fundamental to the human species, and that its practice is substantially influenced by social mores and cultural expectations. In other words, the incidence of homosexuality and heterosexuality is not fixed and universal. The two sexual orientations are not mutually exclusive. There is, in fact, a good deal of fluidity and overlap. In other words, bisexuality. We now have solid scientific data that our sexuality is significantly affected by biological predispositions, such as genes and hormones in the womb, as documented in the book Born Gay, published in 2005. However, other causal factors appear to include childhood experiences, social expectations, peer pressure, and moral values. They challenge erotic impulses in certain directions and not others. An individual's sexual orientation is thus influenced culturally as well as biologically. We know that even in intensely homophobic societies like Nazi Germany and fundamentalist Iran, a sizable proportion of the population experience both same-sex and opposite-sex arousal. Somewhat surprisingly, a survey conducted for the Iranian parliament in 2014 found a huge increase in the number of students who identify as gay or had a same-sex relationship, up from 1% to 17%. However, the vast and varied sexological research that has been published in many countries documents only consciously recognized desires as admitted by those surveyed. At the level of unconscious feelings, where passions are often repressed, displaced, sublimated, projected and transferred, it seems probable that very few people are 100% straight or gay. Most are a mixture, even if they never physically express both sides of the sexual equation. This picture of human sexuality is much more complex, diverse and blurred than the traditional simplistic binary image of hetero and homo, so loved by straight moralists and equally significantly by many lesbians and gay men. If sexual orientation has a culturally influenced element of indeterminacy and flexibility, then the present forms of homosexuality and heterosexuality are unlikely to remain the same in perpetuity. As culture changes, so will expressions of sexuality. In a future non-homophobic society, more people are likely to have gay sex as inhibitions diminish and exploration becomes the norm. But simultaneously and paradoxically, less people may identify as gay or lesbian. This is because, in the absence of homophobia, it will make the need to assert and affirm gayness redundant. Let's look at it historically. Lesbian and gay identity is largely a product of anti-gay repression. It is a self-defense mechanism against homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. Faced with persecution for having same-sex relations, the right to have those relationships had to be defended. Hence the emergence of gay identity and the gay rights movement. But if one sexuality is not privileged over another, defining oneself as gay or straight will cease to be necessary and have little social relevance or significance. The result? Our need to maintain sexuality differences, boundaries, and identities disappears with the demise of straight supremacism and homophobia. Homosexuality as a separate, exclusive sexual orientation and identity will begin to fade. And so will its mirror opposite, heterosexuality, as we evolve into a sexually enlightened and accepting post-homophobic society. The vast majority of people will be open to the possibility of both opposite sex and same-sex desires. They won't feel the need to label themselves or others as gay or straight or bisexual, because in a non-homophobic culture, no one will care who we love or who we sleep with. Bravo. Thank you very much.